वतन की याद ने दुनिया को भुला दिया, हमें प्यार में समा लिया है, पास में बुला लिया है, पास में बुला लिया। तेरे वतन की याद ने दुनिया को भुला दिया। चलते हैं जब जमीन पर, लगता गगन में चल रहे, उमंग में है उड़ रहे, तेरे रंग में है ढल रहे, तेरे रंग में है ढल रहे। दिल की बातें सुनते बाबा बाहों में उठा लिया, तेरे वतन की याद ने दुनिया को भुला दिया। कहाँ ये आ गए हैं हम फरिश्तों के जहान में, उजली उजली रोशनी निराले आसमान में, निराले आसमान में। संसार से अलग ही ये संसार है बना दिया, तेरे वतन की याद ने दुनिया को भुला दिया।
Om Shanti, everyone. Good evening. And the weeks seem to be flying past. Last Tuesday was like yesterday. And it's Tuesday again. Another Murli. Another very deep Murli. And another set of things we have to inculcate. So let's just start with what Baba is saying, and let's go through the various pieces of the Murli that Baba talked about and how we could apply it to our lives, to our practice in particular. So this Murli was a Shivaratri Murli, of course. A holy Murli. And it was of March 1992. And Baba started off the Murli in acknowledging that they had created a garden on the stage, and he was appreciating the beautiful garden, and he was appreciating, he was kind of comparing what they had done on the stage to the elevated golden aged nature. And so he was calling us that we're the masters of that pure nature, and we are the Adi Dev and Adi Devi souls. So we are the Adi Dev, the original deities, but we're also the Adi souls, which were the eternal souls. And so in looking at it, Baba drew our attention, and this was the first thing in the Murli, I think, that Baba drew our attention to. So in these Murlis, it's good to make notes. What were the main points that Baba drew to our attention? And what are the practices to support those points? And then we try our best to make the efforts to practice them, not just to remember what he said, but to remember the practices that he described in relation to what he said. So in talking about the garden, he was saying that, of course, the golden aged garden was the Sato Pradhan garden. And then there was this iron aged forest. He says there's a garden here too. But in this iron age, we created this garden. So the Sato Pradhan garden and what we have in today at the confluence. So he was saying that we were the masters of the gardens. Now, whether it's the elevated gardens or of the golden age, the Sato Pradhan gardens, or the garden we create now, we are the masters. And what we are masters of is masters of nature. So recognizing that, Baba is drawing our attention to a practice. So he's saying that we are the masters of nature, and we must be happy on seeing the games of nature. So if we're the masters of nature and we're looking at nature, he's saying, be happy to look at the games that are taking place in nature. And so he says that when nature fluctuates, or when nature shows us these beautiful games, we must remember that we are the masters of nature. And we must observe these games of nature as detached observers. So that's the first thing he drew our attention to, that because we are the masters of nature, when nature fluctuates and shows the beautiful games that they would play, we, the masters, must observe those games as detached observers. And he was saying, because when you observe the games, you will experience a pleasure. But when you get involved in what's happening and you engage in what's happening and you come down from your stage of a detached observer, that's when you're going to get confused. So the first practice is to remain an observer, a detached observer to the games of nature, to the fluctuation of nature, because we were the masters of the Sato Pradhan garden in the Golden Age, and we are still the masters of nature. But now we will only be the masters of nature when we are in that seat of a detached observer. And then Baba went on to talk about this seat of a detached observer. And he said the seat of the detached observer was being unshakable and immovable. And he also said that one of the reasons that he especially asked us to practice Tapasya in 1991, and then he's still talking about it in 1992, was so that we can make ourselves unshakable and immovable by seating on that inner stage of a detached observer. So one of the things Tapasya does, of course, it results in us being stable and unshakable, but Tapasya is our seat of being a detached observer. So if I'm a tapas V, I could be a tapas V being in the oven, I'm just sitting, no action, nothing, and I'm just in intense meditation, practicing a particular stage, like the seed form stage or whatever stage. But to be a tapasvi also means that I'm unshakable and immovable inside, and that puts me on the stage of a detached observer while I'm in action. So he was saying that this is why he told us to really practice that tapasya, so that we can accomplish this stage so that we do not shake. Our inner stage would not shake when we witness these fluctuations outside. So then he warned us. He says, no matter what happens, neither nature nor individuals can even slightly shake that seat, that inner seat of an unshakable stage. So the year of Tapasya was to make us strong and to make us stable, to make us unshakable, and to be in the seat of the detached observer, because we were going to have to face a lot of situations outside of us and maybe also inside of us that would create fluctuations. And then Baba talked about the game of the 10 players. And he talked about the game of the 10 players. Actually, 5 players were from nature and 5 players were from Maya. And he says, of course, we know these 10 very well. So the 5 players of nature will be the 5 elements, and the 5 players of Maya would be the 5 vices. And then he says, this is the game that we're going to have to watch. We're going to have to watch these players play the game. And so he says it will come right in front of us. We will be in the midst of these games, both from nature and from the vices. And he says, well, you know, he gave the example of today's people being very interested in games. They love to watch games. They enjoy watching the games. They enjoy, looking at people losing, and because their side is winning, and they enjoy the victory that they see as well. And so he says that this thing of games, watching games, we're all very good at. And so he used that as a metaphor. So when we're watching the game of these 10 players, he says it's a very big game that we're going to be witnessing. What we have to pay attention to in watching the game of these 10 players is that we do not get off of our seat of that detached observer. We do not get off the seat of the detached observer. We do not allow our stage of being unshakable and immovable to even shake, even slightly. So he says, no matter how much someone may try to shake it, we should not allow ourselves to be shaken. So this was what he continued to warn us of. And, you know, when you look, if you were to go a little bit deeper into this whole thing of the game of the 5 elements and the game of the 5 vices, I think it's an outer game and it's an inner game. So the game of the 5 elements will be in our external world. We'll watch the natural calamities. We'll watch the civil wars. We'll watch the atomic wars. We'll watch all these things that are going on in our outside world, the droughts, the floods, the famine, all these different things happening in climate change, for instance. But the game of the 5 vices is actually happening inside of us. So the triggers of shaking will either come from the external, the games of the nature, the 5 players of nature, or it will come from inside of us, which will be the game of the 5 vices. And both will trigger us. It will shake our stage if we don't remain a detached observer to both. So we have to be a detached observer on the inside, observing ourselves. We have to be a detached observer on the outside, observing the game on the outside. But at the same time, the attention should be on being on the seat of the detached observer and looking from that inner stage of being unshakable and immovable, because nothing, he says, No one or nothing should be able to shake us even slightly. And then Baba went on to introduce this whole subject of the festival that he had come to celebrate. And he talked about the flowers that he was seeing. So he talked about the color, the beauty, and the fragrance. So he says when he comes into the garden, he doesn't come to look at the leaves and the greenery, I suppose, in the garden. What attracts him most are the flowers. So he comes and he's seeing the spiritual flowers who are his children. And he says, of course, when he's looking at his children, he's seeing a variety of very beautiful flowers, very colorful flowers. And he was asking us, do we know what the color is? Do we know what the beauty is? And do we know what the fragrance is that Baba looks at when he sees his spiritual flowers? Now, when we go into a garden, we know what color flowers we like, depending on the season, I suppose. But we have one or two favorite colors that we always like, no matter what season. We also know what the beauty of the flowers we like in the garden. The beauty, every flower has a specific beauty. So if you look at the beauty of marigolds or gaindas, and you look at the beauty of the Edelweiss, or you look at the beauty of jasmine, and you look at the beauty of sunflower, they're all very different flowers. And I would prefer certain flowers, even though within the range of beauty, I will always have my favorite beautiful flowers. And then Baba talked about the fragrance. And so he says that fragrance also is something that attracts us to the flower that we like. And so, but what does he look at inside of us when he's looking at these three elements of his spiritual flowers? So he says, when he looks at the color of the children as flowers, he says he looks to see to what extent we are colored by the Father's company. And so he says that this is something, it seems as though, is a constant for him. He's not talking about how much percentage we are colored, but the fact that we are colored by his company. That means we are in his company. We are remembering him. So he says that even if we're not completely content with things or with our interactions with others, even with our efforts, what he saw that continued to exist was the color of Baba's company. And this color of Baba's company seemed to be something that we all love. It was loved by all, he said. And so the color that he was talking about is the color of his company that we all have because we love to be in his company. And so he says that the first thing was the color. The second was the beauty. Now, beauty is always connected to form, right? So when you look at beauty, you see the form. What form is this flower? What are its, the features of the flower then? What are the elements of the flower that I like? So he was also looking at us, and he was looking at the beauty of our forms. And he says that the beauty of Brahmin souls was that it doesn't matter what level of effort we are at, what level of efforts we're making, what is the quality of our efforts. But once we became a Brahmin and we change our form from Shudra to Brahmin, our form changed. So he was looking at that transformation of form, and it is a form of the self. It's like a swarup. It is the form that the self takes when it changes its consciousness. And when that individual changes its consciousness from being a Shudra to being a Brahmin, then he says that Brahmin soul, there's a sparkle that shows the beauty of that Brahmin soul. And he says that then this beauty, of course, complements the color of the father's company. And so think about it. When I say I'm beautiful, or when Baba says you are beautiful, he is looking at that transformation, that shift of consciousness from a Shudra to a Brahmin. And when I'm in the consciousness of being a Brahmin, he says there's a sparkle of beauty that emanates from that consciousness. And then Baba talked about fragrance.
योगी बनो ज्ञानी बनो योगी जीवन है प्यारा योगी बनो ज्ञानी बनो योगी जीवन है प्यारा काम क्रोध मद लोभ मोह वश आज है सब मोहताज योग लगा कर पाप मिटा ले स्वर्ग सजा ले तू आज काम क्रोध मद लोभ मोह वश आज है सब मोहताज योग लगा कर पाप मिटा ले स्वर्ग सजा ले तू आज
जन्म जन्म की प्यास बुझा ले पावन बन कर आज
योगी बनो ज्ञानी बनो योगी जीवन है प्यारा
संगम युग में परम पिता शिव कहते हैं राज
तू है एक अविनाशी आत्मा सुन लो मेरी आवाज
संगम युग में परम पिता शिव कहते हैं राज
तू है एक अविनाशी आत्मा सुन लो मेरी आवाज
सुख शांति और पावनता से झोले भर लो आज
योगी बनो ज्ञानी बनो योगी जीवन है प्यारा
परम धाम से आए हैं शिव ब्रह्मा तन आधार मुक्ति और जीवन मुक्ति का जन्म सिद्ध अधिकार परम धाम से आए हैं शिव ब्रह्मा तन आधार मुक्ति और जीवन मुक्ति का जन्म सिद्ध अधिकार
चलना है चलना है घर वापस अब तो यही ज्ञान का सार योगी बनो ज्ञानी बनो योगी जीवन है प्यारा योगी जीवन है प्यारा योगी जीवन है प्यारा
So after the color and the beauty, Baba spoke about the fragrance. And when Baba spoke about the fragrance, he said fragrance was number wise. Because when he talked about fragrance, he referred to it as complete purity. And so, whereas the color was to be in his company and we all loved him, and the beauty was to move from being a Brahmin, from being a Shudra to being a Brahmin, and the sparkle of that shift of consciousness was seen. When it came to the fragrance, Baba said that was number wise. And because the fragrance was of complete purity. But then he says, the fragrance is also connected to being the Brahmin, the form, and that is, we become brothers and sisters. So it's not that we are just Kumar and Kumari, but we are Brahma Kumar and Brahma Kumari. So the form of being a brother and a sister, the form of being children of Bapdada, of Prajapita Brahma. He says that was where the purity became complete. And so that relationship of being a Brahma Kumar and a Kumari, children of Bapdada, was what would lead us to this complete purity. And that was number wise. And then Baba went into a promise in which he says that the purity he's talking about is very subtle. And of course, he said he was going to take it up in another Murli. And of course, we're all looking forward to that Murli. But what he was saying is that when he talks about purity, which is brahmachari, it's not just a celibacy of the body. That is not what he means when he says complete purity. That is, I always say, the first step, the stepping stone to move deeper. That's the entry point to move deeper into this complete purity that he's talking about. And of course, this is the month that we've been looking at purity from all sides around, from up and down, from in and out. And we're trying really to apply it to a personality of purity that my Brahmin life, my effort-making life is giving me an opportunity to achieve at the confluence age, this thing called complete purity. And so Baba's saying that for him, complete purity starts with the body, but then it goes to the mind. There must be complete purity in the mind. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And he says complete purity in the mind means not to be attached, not to be attached to anyone except to the one Father. So I take my strength and my support from no one else but Baba. Baba is the source of all the virtues in my life. I share that with others, but I don't take it from them. Otherwise, that is not called complete purity. When my mind is going to people and places and possessions to pull purity from, or pull any of the virtues from, Baba says that is not called complete purity, but to have just the connection to one Baba. Then he talked about purity or celibacy in relationships with others. So that's another big one, because my relationship to others is where a lot of conditions and expectations and create a lot of conflicts and a lot of dependency. All those things are within relationships. So he wants complete purity in relationships. And then, of course, complete purity in our sanskaras. So when he talks about complete purity, it's from the body to the mind, from the mind to relationships, from relationships to sanskaras. And of course, everything else will be connected to those areas from within. One of the interesting things he didn't mention was purity of intellect, celibacy of intellect. Yet he says we should have a clean and clear intellect. And so maybe if the mind is clean and the sanskaras are clean, our relationships are clean and pure, the intellect automatically would be pure. So that is something we should look forward to, because with all the beautiful things we've heard in this month of Dadiji's, which comes to an end tomorrow, purity was one of the outstanding things in her life, but also it was taken up so beautifully every single day. And we should actually be feeling very great about all these things we discovered about purity. And so when we say feeling great no matter what, it means we're feeling great because we are exploring our own purity. And when we explore the depth of our purity, of course, greatness emerges. We feel great. We feel a great sense of self-worth. We feel a great delight in being who we are. And so one of the great delights that we feel with this level of purity is becoming holy swans. So Baba is saying when we celebrate holy, we're actually celebrating this complete purity that he's talking about. And when you feel this complete purity in your life, you feel like a holy swan and you celebrate holy. And so he was saying that what do holy swans do? They constantly swim and they fly. And so what it is, what does it mean to be a holy swan is to know how to swim and to know how to fly. I have to know both. And I suppose you remember what he says? What does swimming, when a holy swan swims, how do they swim? Spiritually speaking, what does that mean? And so he said to swim means to churn the ocean of knowledge. And to swim in the nectar of knowledge, not just to churn it, but to enjoy the nectar, the essence of what you're churning. And to fly means, he says, to be in an elevated stage. And that elevated stage, if we go back to the beginning of the Murli, and he was telling us that we need to have this stage of being a detached observer, and we need to have the inner stage of being this seat of a detached observer will create this stage of being immovable and unshakable inside. That's the elevated stage. We shouldn't even ask the question, what is the elevated stage? Because he described it at the beginning of the Murli. And then Baba talked about, he went on to tell us a little bit more about, being a holy swan and having this complete purity. And so, for instance, if we were to have complete purity in our minds, he says, what you will experience is you will experience as though you have 100% love in your minds for Baba. And so he was saying, Baba also has love for the children. And so when our minds are becoming more and more pure, we will experience more and more love for Baba. But when Baba looks at our minds, even though they're not pure, he still sees that we have this 100% love, or we want to have this 100% love for Baba. And he responds to that. So he responds to this pure desire we have for this 100% love for him. And so he's responding to that because that's what he's seeing. So he says that how his love works for us, and it's amazing to really remember this, no matter what is going on in my life, if I just remember this. He's saying that he always has love for us, no matter what, whether we fall, whether we climb, or whether we're mischievous. That means if we play around with him, if we play games with him. So he always has that love for us. Now, this is something that we need to remember. We should never forget this, that if we're climbing, if we're falling, if we're being mischievous, if we're playing games, Baba's love for us never changes because he understands what's causing us to do what we're doing. And so he says that the reason he has to have that love for us always is because we're his children. And the moment we say Bab, the moment we say Father, and the moment he responds to us as children, that means his love is being expressed for us. And he says, no matter what we go through, on his part, that doesn't change. Now, not only does he have the love for us as we're going through whatever we may be going through, and that never changes, but he said this love also carries with it Baba's pure hope for us. it is as if no matter where we go, we're walking along and we're about to go to the edge of a cliff, to fall off the cliff. It is as if this hope, this pure hope that he has in us, pulls us back gradually. And eventually we will come back to him because we have nowhere else to go, he says. And so it was interesting to read and understand how Baba's hope works in our lives. So he says that even if a child were to leave, Baba never gets disheartened with any of his children. So he says he will continue to have those pure hopes for those children who are leaving him. Because even if the children went away, Baba will continue having hope in them. Because he knows if not today, then tomorrow, the child will return. Because where else will they go? Now, when that child returns, it's a little bit like the prodigal son, in Christianity. When the prodigal son returned, the father was there to welcome him. The father didn't send him away and says, well, you disobeyed me. There's no place in my house for you. No, he was welcomed back because of the father's pure hope. So that means, Baba says, I never get disheartened with any of my children. The second thing is when we're settling our karmic accounts. He says he observes us settling our karmic accounts. So whether it's a little bit, or whether it's a lot, or whether it's slight, whatever it is, Baba has one pure hope for us. And that is, we should get better quickly. He doesn't ever give up hope in our ability, our strength to settle our karmas. And so if we're settling and whenever we reach out to him, he would always be there to give us the help, because we are constantly depending on the strength of Baba's hope in us to heal, to settle that karmic account. And that's also beautiful to know, that no one else can help me settle my karmic account, because they may have hope in me, but they don't have that pure hope because they don't know what's going on inside of me. And even if I don't have the strength to rise to the occasion to settle my karmic account in the way that I should be doing it, Baba never gets disheartened with me. He never gets fed up with me. He's always there to help me with that pure hope that he has, because he knows what he's saying is that today you might be a little bit slack, but I know you will have the strength tomorrow. So I'm keeping the hope in you when you're weak and when you're strong. And so that was so very beautiful. And because he says that, where else would you go for this help? Where else? What's your destination ultimately when you want to tap into help and support, to strengthen support? It's only to the one Father. You have nowhere else to go but to the one Father. And I thought that was so very beautiful. It's as though he is reaffirming in us how much faith we should have in him, because these are things he does for us, which may sound little and in many instances insignificant, but it is these small things that make our lives so colorful, so beautiful, so full of fragrance, because Baba steps in these small moments. And in these small moments of Baba stepping in, they have big impact on our lives. So this is the kind of holy he was inviting us to celebrate and to realize. Then he also talked about entitlement, which I thought was very interesting. And he talked about our entitlement to the inheritance that he has come to give. And he said, of course, I've come to give liberation. Everyone gets liberation. But you, the Brahmins, who have this direct connection with him, you get liberation in life. So he says, all souls, you look at all souls on the tree, will receive their inheritance from the Father. Even, he says, if they insulted him, even if they call him omnipresent, even if they say this about him or that about him, Baba still gives that inheritance of liberation to all souls. And so he says, the souls will definitely go to the home with him. And then he gave this little bit of beautiful gyan. And he says, because we have incarnated in this corporeal world, and because we're playing our part in this corporeal world, Baba cannot deprive us of our inheritance. So he gives all souls of the tree the inheritance of liberation. Whether they take it or not, Baba has to give it to them. That means Baba will find a way to give it to them, and they will take it from him. So that's very beautiful. That's such a guarantee to the whole tree. And then he said that to use this word Father and the whole, he says, of humanity, actually consciously or unconsciously call out to God as the Father. And so the moment we call out to him as the Father, he becomes present to give us that inheritance. Because he says the meaning of the word Father is the one who will give the inheritance. So this word Father and inheritance doesn't belong to any one religion. So he says it doesn't matter which religion someone is in or which religion they remember him as the Father through. He says not a single one can be deprived of that inheritance. They're entitled to it because they call him the Father. And so that was also a very powerful thing to understand, because he says, how could you call me Father and not get your inheritance? Of course, you have to get that inheritance from him. And then Baba made the distinction now between general souls in the tree and the direct souls. So he says, we, the Brahmin souls, what we have is direct connection, and we have a direct recognition of Baba. So we then claim the inheritance directly. We claim it directly by recognizing him, and we claim it directly by having a direct connection with him. And then he reminded us that when he entered into this corporeal form of Brahma Baba, and Brahma Baba became his instrument through whom he spoke, never for one moment did Brahma Baba say to us, the children, remember him. Brahma Baba always said, remember Shiv Baba. And he says this was the direct recognition and the direct connection. And of course, we also have a direct, close relationship with the Father. And he says this direct, close relationship continues with us throughout the three aspects of time. And so he was saying we receive the inheritance now, and the inheritance we are receiving now is of virtues and powers. He says we will receive the inheritance of peace when we're in the land of liberation. And we will receive the inheritance of peace and also remaining close to Baba in the home, the land of liberation. And we will also receive the inheritance of happiness, but also stay close in the land of liberation and life, which is heaven. So that was the meaning of this direct and close relationship that we will have within the context of the three aspects of time. And then Baba elaborated on it a little bit more when he says that not only will you have this closeness of liberation in life, but you will receive this inheritance for 21 births. So that was also very, 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 imagine my closeness to Baba now determines my closeness to him in 21 births. So does that mean I will only be close to Brahma Baba in the golden and silver ages? Of course, I'll be close to Brahma Baba, but also I will be close to the invisible presence of Shiv Baba, because it's his creation. Heaven is his creation. So the closeness would be to such an extent that I don't even have to call out to him. I don't even have to remember him. It is as if he's so much with me. And so Baba was saying we should, with this direct relationship, close relationship with him, remember that it is also connected to being soul conscious, being immortal, being in the intoxication of our original selves, our Adi selves. And that is, we should remember it at the present time when we are practicing soul consciousness. We should remember this after death, that there's nothing like death. That transitional period, we still are close to Baba. And of course, when we enter our new bodies, that closeness will still remain. And then Baba went into the whole thing of holy after setting that context. And he says that holy, the word, like we would say H-O-L-Y, which is holy, being sacred. So H-O-L-I in Hindi means you're celebrating Holi, the same thing. It's a very sacred festival. So he was saying that Holi has two meanings, and that is to burn, and then you celebrate. So what are you burning? He says that you have to burn. The first thing you have to burn is the fire. In the fire is your weaknesses. So our weaknesses have got to be burned. In which fire? He says in the fire of determination. We have to do that first. We have to burn our weaknesses in the fire of determination, and then we'll be celebrating in pleasure. So he says that you cannot celebrate in pleasure anything if you don't burn the weaknesses, because the weakness will infiltrate, it will pollute it. So he says this was the first meaning of holy. The second meaning of holy, he said, is ho, H-O, and then the next word is L-I. So it's two words, holy. And he says holy means past, is past. And it means whatever has happened in the past, leave it behind. It has already happened. Don't pull it with you. Don't let it be a chain that pull you back, or you don't pull it into your present and therefore into your future. So this was the past is past holy that Baba wanted us to become very clear about. But how do I do that? What's the practice? He was saying that if Baba is saying that to do this, to put this full stop, the past is past, is never to put a question mark to what has happened in the past. Don't question it. Don't ask any question about why it happened, how it happened, where it happened, who it happened with. No, just put a full stop. And he says that's the first thing. And to get the strength to do this, he was saying, you need tapasya. You need that very concentrated yoga with him over a long period of time, even if you're doing it in small amounts every day, but keep doing it. Then this tapasya will give you that determination, will give you that strength to put your past behind. So that was another outcome of the year that he indicated to us, that the Tapasya gave us the strength to put the past behind with a full stop. But he says, however, we make this small mistake. And it was very beautiful how he said it, that we make these small mistakes. And he said the small mistake is small, but the impact is huge. It creates a lot of damage in our lives. And he says the mistake that we make is our confused state of being when it comes to these two words, what I have to remember and what I have to forget. So he says, you do not want to forget the Father, but nevertheless you forget him. Why is that? Why is that? I don't want to forget Baba, but nevertheless, I forget him. He says, because we have this weakness that when we have to forget something, why don't we forget it at that time? So this is what we have to check. If I want to forget something, why can I not forget it at that time? I want to forget it, but I cannot forget it. So I'm checking myself. And I keep remembering it again and again. So these are the layers that we have to check within ourselves. What is causing that? What is causing it? So Baba says, this is what we have to learn. At the time when you have to forget something, you remember it. And at the time you have to remember something, you forget it. So correct this small mistake, he said, and finish all traces of it. So if I want to remember something, and this is Baba, I should be remembering him. I shouldn't forget to remember him. And if I want to forget something in order to remember Baba, I must have the power to forget it. So this is something, it's kind of he used the word in a way that these words, forgetting and remembering, in a way that we have to play around with it a little bit within ourselves to strengthen both the powers. We need the strength for both, the power to forget and the power to remember. But what are we forgetting and what are we remembering? That is what has to be clear with us. And he gave the example of remembering him. So let's practice strengthening, forgetting, and remembering in relation to remembering Baba. And then he calls us, he says that it should be easy for us to do this because we are enlightened souls. And if we are enlightened souls, we have wisdom. And so we should be able to forget what we want to forget in a second and to remember Baba in a second, or to remember that which we need to remember in a second. And so he says, now put away all those question marks of why and what, and do away with the queue of the whys and whats, and just put a full stop. Now he was saying, he's not just saying put a stop, he's saying put a full stop. And he says this full stop he wants us to put is actually 3 dots. So it's dot, dot, dot. That's a full stop. The first dot is Baba. Or maybe the first dot is me. I am a soul. I'm a dot. The second dot is Baba, right? And the third dot is put a stop to all the waste or the weaknesses. So me, the dot, Baba, the middle dot, and whatever is the waste or the weakness, the third dot. I'm putting a dot to that. I'm stopping it. So it's interesting. Baba is in between the soul and the soul's weaknesses. So the 3 dots would be the full stop. And then Baba talked about the color that happens at Holi. So we burn and we celebrate. And he's now talking about this eternal dance. He talked about the eternal Holi. And he was saying that this whole festival of Holi, when they play with colors and they play with such a vitalness, a vitality to them, it's though their life is expressing its color through music, through dance, through laughter, through lightness, through love, relationships. So he was saying that this color, this dancing is the eternal Holi, because it's the same thing we did in Baba's company, the same thing we did in the Father's company. That's how we felt when we celebrated Holi in Baba's company. And so he doesn't want anymore for us to say things like, it just happened, what can I do? I did not wish it to happen, but it did happen. All of those things. Baba says, no, finish all of this and stay in the eternal holy of being colored by Baba's company. And he says, this is what it means to be a Master Almighty Authority. And you see, what I liked about this, when he said, this is what it means to be a Master Almighty Authority, is that a Master Almighty Authority doesn't come from strenuous laws and regulations and rules and customs and systems. It comes from dancing this eternal holy in the company of Baba. Because once I'm able to finish off my waste, then there's a lightness within me. And the lightness within me gives me both the authority that God has, but also the lightness of the love that God has. And then finally, in the Murli, Baba talked to the double foreigners. And of course, he told us that we had love for service and we love to expand service. And we must continue to do that, but we had to pay attention on ourselves, not just on the service, but we had to pay attention on creating a strong stage within ourselves. And this, he says, this inner stage will give us success. Now, this inner stage that he talked about is a combined stage, he was saying. And so the combined stage that he talked about was a balance of first serving myself, self-service first, before I serve another. And, you know, we sometimes forget to do that. You know, before, when we did the 7 days course, when we gave people the 7 days course, before they arrived to do the course, we were supposed to go sit in Baba's room for at least 10 minutes, maximum 50 minutes. You could sit more if you want. So we used to go and sit in Baba's room, be with Baba, be in yoga, prepare our inner selves before we meet this new student coming and before we start giving them the course. You know, when Baba says, don't ever say I was too busy doing service, so I wasn't able to do my chart or to go sit in Baba's room before I start giving the course to someone else. He says, that means you didn't serve yourself. And so you won't be able to do the service in a way that it will bring success. So he was saying that we do need to stay in the combined form. We know of the various combined form. We know of the Shiv Shakti form combined with Shiv Baba. We know of the soul in its combined form with its body. And we also know the combined form of Vishnu. But he was saying now we have to do service to ourselves before we serve others as another combined form. And we should not separate them. Because he says if we separate them, we would receive less success. And we would always feel that whatever we're doing would leave a kind of an incomplete state within me. It's like I wouldn't give myself the certificate of contentment. And perhaps the person I'm serving wouldn't give me the certificate of contentment because they also would feel something, it's not complete. There is something that's incomplete. So it wasn't successful. So Baba was saying that, you know, we have to serve in all four directions. The air quality souls were already there. Now we have to do service in which it's like, you know, you're maximizing service. So he says, do service. Daddy Janki used to talk about this. Serve one, and then many others will be served through that one. Because we now have to give the message to the whole world. So Daddy Janki, I remember she used to say for the call of the time that people used to say, Daddy, you could come to India and you could serve hundreds of thousands of people. Why are you just sitting with 30 people in the call of the time dialogue? And Daddy would say, because each one of these souls in the call of the time dialogue, when I serve one of them, they in turn will serve 100,000 others. And so that is what Baba is saying. In order to serve the whole world, don't look that I have to serve oh so many people. Serve one. It's called the leverage person. And that person will serve many more. And so it doesn't always have to be people in positions, but it could be people who are serving those in positions, but who have got access to all the people in the company. And so it could be the managers, it could be, the personnel, rather than the ones, if you can't get to the ones at the top, don't lose hope. Just serve whoever is available, because sometimes they have more, they come into more contact with the people than the actual leaders. And so wasn't it a beautiful, beautiful Murli, in which Baba, each point, Baba was giving us a practice to do. So if we were to look at the whole Murli again, we would get a lot of practice that would help us. But I think the one practice that would help us be better people is that, and better effort makers, not just better people, but better effort makers, because this is the effort we fail in. And people tend to poke at us and create and make us shake and make us fluctuate. And then we lose our inner stage. And then we say, I've been making efforts all these years, and just one word or two words from someone toppled my whole stage. It's like the ants moving into the ear of the elephant and toppling the elephant, just two words. So what Baba is saying, practice this detached observer seat and practice being immovable and unshakable. Now, in today's Murli, Baba talked about the lighthouse. You remember today's Murli? And what is a lighthouse? A lighthouse is stable and unshakable. It does not move, but the light moves, because the light in the lighthouse is supposed to be guiding the ships at sea to their destination. So it's detached. It doesn't call out to the ships and say, come, 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 here I am. Come to me and I will show you the way. No, it's totally detached. It's doing its work. And Baba says, in one eye, you should have heaven, and in one eye, you should have the home. One eye, peace, one eye, happiness, one eye, liberation, one eye, liberation in life. And so think about the part Baba was talking about, inheritance. And he says, I have come to give the whole world inheritance. So if we stand there as a lighthouse, we stand there radiating, just being still, stable and unshakable, and just being in Baba's remembrance, then Baba's light would shine through us, and people will not see us. They will see the Father. And they will, in response, say, Baba or Abba or Father. And in that moment of saying it, they get their inheritance. So we have to do that, right? We have to be the instruments. And so, and of course, when he talked about purity, there's so many beautiful points in today's Murli that, in Sunday's Murli, that if we practice, our efforts will become so much easier, because that's what we want, right? We want our lives to be easy. We want our efforts to be natural. And we want our purity to be complete. Okay, anybody with any questions before I close? No questions in the chat box. I love that. That means you've understood it. You have no questions. Are you all good? You enjoyed listening again to all the beautiful things Baba said? All right, so let's close now with Baba's remembrance.
तुम्हारे प्यार से बाबा हुई राहें मेरी उजली, तुम्हारे प्यार से बाबा हुई राहें मेरी उजली, रुहा अनेकों जिंदगी बदली रूहानी नजरों ने तेरी, अनेकों जिंदगी बदली तुम्हारे प्यार से बाबा। मेरे मन की धरा पर तुम गगन बन कर के छाए हो, उठी नजरें जिधर भी बस नजर तुम ही तो आए हो, नजर तुम ही तो आए हो। यही तो मन की चाहत थी हमारे दिल की, जो सुन ली तुम्हारे प्यार से बाबा।
Om Shanti, good evening.
Om Shanti.
See you later tonight. I'm doing my last interview tonight with Sister Mohini.
Okay.
So I'll see you then.
Shanti. Bye.